I am Boyd, 34, a software developer who finally bought my dream vacation home in Lake Tahoe after years of hard work. My younger brother Marcus, 27, has always been the golden child who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. When I found my beautiful property completely trashed after letting Marcus borrow it, my parents just shrugged and said, "He is just young. You can afford it." What they did not expect was how I would make them all accountable. If you are enjoying this story, please like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you are watching from. This family drama is just getting started. Growing up as the older brother in my family meant carrying a weight of responsibility from a very young age. By 16, I was already working part-time jobs after school to save for college. Unlike many of my friends whose parents had college funds set aside, mine made it clear early on that my education would be my own responsibility. It builds character, my father would say. I took his words to heart, maintaining a perfect GPA throughout high school, which eventually earned me a partial scholarship to a state university. Still, it was not enough to cover everything, so I juggled 2 jobs throughout college, working at the campus library during weekdays and waiting tables on weekends. Those years were tough but formative. While my friends were out partying, I was either studying or working. I graduated with a degree in computer science and only minimal student loans, which I paid off within 3 years of graduating. My career in software development started at a small startup where I worked 80-hour weeks, learning everything I could about the industry. Over the years, I climbed the corporate ladder through pure grit and determination, moving from junior developer to team lead, then to project manager, and finally to my current position as a senior software architect at one of the major tech companies in San Francisco. Every promotion, every raise, every success came from my own efforts. No connections, no handouts, just hard work and persistence. By the time I turned 30, I had established myself as a respected professional in my field, with financial stability that my 20-year-old self could only have dreamed about. Marcus, on the other hand, lived a completely different reality. 7 years younger than me, he grew up with different rules and expectations. Where I had strict curfews, Marcus would stroll in at whatever hour without consequences. Where I was expected to maintain perfect grades, his C averages were met with, "Well, not everyone is academically inclined." The pattern continued into his adulthood. Marcus started college at an expensive private university, fully funded by our parents, who had suddenly discovered the ability to pay for education. He switched majors 3 times before dropping out in his junior year, claiming the academic environment was too restrictive for his creative spirit. That was the first of many failures that somehow never seemed to be his fault. After college, Marcus went through jobs like most people go through socks. He was a barista who got fired for constantly showing up late. Then a retail associate who just could not handle the corporate vibe. He tried his hand at being a fitness instructor but quit because the early mornings were killing his social life. With each failure, our parents were there with a safety net of excuses and financial support. "He is just trying to find himself," they would tell me when I expressed concern. "Not everyone knows what they want to do right away like you did." By the time Marcus turned 27, he had never paid his own rent for more than 3 consecutive months. My parents were still subsidizing his transitional phase, as they called it, sending him money whenever his latest paycheck could not cover his expenses, which was nearly every month. The stark contrast in how we were treated was not just about financial support, but extended to emotional expectations as well. From childhood, I was always told to be the bigger person whenever conflicts arose. If Marcus broke my things, I was told not to make a big deal about it because he was younger. If he insulted me at family gatherings, I was expected to laugh it off because that is just how brothers talk to each other. My mother, a kind woman in many ways, had a blind spot the size of Texas when it came to Marcus. Your brother is just more sensitive than you, she would explain when I questioned the double standards. You have always been so independent and strong, Boyd. Marcus needs more guidance. What she meant was that Marcus needed more coddling, more excuses, and more bailouts. My father, a traditional man who valued hard work in theory, somehow never applied those values when it came to his younger son. Boys will be boys, was his favorite phrase whenever Marcus crossed a line. It was a phrase I noticed he never used for my transgressions, which were met with stern lectures about responsibility and consequences. Over the years, my resentment toward this unfair treatment gradually transformed into a kind of resigned acceptance. I focused on building my own life, creating success on my terms, and establishing independence from the family drama. I maintained my relationship with my parents and brother, attending holiday gatherings and occasional family dinners. But I kept an emotional distance that protected me from the frustration of their continued pattern. I set boundaries, or at least I tried to. I made it clear that I would not lend money to Marcus, which led to some tense family dinners, but eventually became an accepted rule. I declined to be his emergency contact for apartments or jobs, knowing from experience that I would be called whenever he failed to meet his responsibilities. These boundaries were constantly tested, questioned, and sometimes trampled, but I held firm as best I could. Last year, after a particularly successful project that earned me a substantial bonus, I decided to fulfill a long-held dream. I purchased a vacation property in Lake Tahoe, a beautiful 3-bedroom cabin with stunning lake views. At $750,000, it was a significant investment, but one that made financial sense given the property's potential appreciation and the rental income it could generate when I was not using it. The cabin represented more than just a financial investment, though. It was my sanctuary, a place where I could disconnect from the demands of my high-pressure job and find peace in nature. I spent weeks carefully furnishing it with quality pieces that balanced comfort and style. I installed a top-of-the-line entertainment system, stocked the kitchen with everything a home chef could desire, and even splurged on some original artwork from local artists to give the place character and warmth. When I finally showed pictures of the finished cabin to my family, their reactions were telling. My parents expressed pride, but quickly followed up with, you should let the family use it sometimes. Marcus just whistled and said, must be nice to have that kind of money to throw around. Neither acknowledged the years of work and sacrifice that had made this purchase possible. Still, I was proud of what I had accomplished. The vacation home was tangible proof that my approach to life, despite its difficulties and lack of safety nets, had paid off. It was something I had earned entirely on my own, a space that was truly mine. Little did I know that this symbol of my success would soon become the catalyst for the biggest family confrontation of my adult life. It was a surprisingly warm Tuesday evening in April when my phone lit up with Marcus's name. We typically communicated through family group chats or at gatherings, so a direct call from him was unusual enough to make me curious. Boyd, my man, how is the tech wizard doing? His voice had that familiar, enthusiastic tone that typically preceded a request. I am good, Marcus. What is up? I kept my response neutral, already bracing myself. So listen, I have been doing a lot of thinking lately about my life and where I am headed. He started, his voice taking on an uncharacteristically serious note. I know I have not exactly been the model of responsibility in the past, but I am really turning things around. I had heard variations of this speech before, usually when he needed something, but something in his tone made me pause before dismissing it. "That is good to hear," I offered cautiously. "Yeah, well, the biggest change is actually about Rachel." Rachel was his girlfriend of 8 months, the longest relationship he had maintained since high school. "She is different from anyone I have ever been with. She makes me want to be better, you know? She seems nice from what I have seen at family dinners," I acknowledged, remembering a polite, soft-spoken woman who somehow managed to redirect Marcus whenever he started going down inappropriate conversational paths. "She is amazing," Marcus continued, "and that is kind of why I am calling. I am planning to propose to her." This was genuinely surprising. "Wow. That is a big step." "I know, right? But I am ready. For the first time, I actually feel like I know what I want." There was a pause before he continued. "And what I want is to make it really special for her. She loves the outdoors, always talking about hiking and lakes and stuff. And then I remembered your place in Tahoe, and there it was." The request I had been anticipating emerged, cloaked in this newfound maturity narrative. "You want to use my cabin to propose?" I clarified. "Just for a weekend," he quickly added. "I thought it would be perfect, you know? Romantic setting, beautiful views. I would treat it like it was my own place. Better, even. Complete respect for your space, man." I found myself in a genuine internal debate. On one hand, every past experience with Marcus suggested that lending him anything of value was a risk. On the other hand, what if this was legitimate? What if he really was changing? A marriage proposal was significant, not just another impulse. And if Rachel was having the positive influence on him that he claimed, maybe supporting this moment was the right thing to do. "I do not know, Marcus," I said hesitantly. "The cabin is really important to me. I have put a lot of work into it." "I totally get that," he responded, sounding unusually understanding. "And I would never do anything to disrespect that. I swear on everything, Boyd. This matters to me. I just want to give Rachel a proposal she will never forget." I thought about it for a few more moments, weighing the risk against the possibility that this could be a turning point in both our relationship and Marcus's life. If I agree to this, there would need to be some very clear rules, I finally said. "Absolutely. Whatever you say goes. I am all ears." His voice brightened immediately. "No parties." I started firmly. "Just you and Rachel. Maybe 1 or 2 friends if they are part of the proposal plan. But absolutely no more than 4 people total in the house at any time. Of course, totally reasonable. No smoking inside under any circumstances. The furniture and everything else needs to be exactly as you found it. You will need to clean thoroughly before you leave." "Not a problem. Rachel would kill me if I smoked anyway. She is all about that health life. If anything gets broken or damaged, you replace it. Not mom and dad, not me. You." 100% fair. I continued listing my conditions, including specific instructions about the security system, the neighbors, and the proper operation of various appliances. I even suggested that he put down a security deposit, which he quickly agreed to but then conveniently forgot to send before the planned weekend. Despite my lingering concerns, I found myself wanting to believe in this new version of Marcus. Maybe this was the beginning of a more mature relationship between us. Maybe supporting his proposal would help bridge some of the distance that had grown between us over the years. "I really appreciate this, Boyd," Marcus said as we wrapped up the call. "This means a lot to me. I promise you will not regret it." We arranged to meet at a coffee shop halfway between our apartments that weekend for me to hand over the keys and go through the house manual I had prepared. When Saturday came, I arrived with a binder containing detailed instructions for everything in the cabin, from operating the somewhat temperamental hot water heater to the proper settings for the alarm system. Marcus was actually on time for once. Another small sign that perhaps he was taking this seriously. He listened attentively as I went through the manual, asking relevant questions and taking notes on his phone. The alarm code is my birthday, I explained. Should be easy enough to remember. Your birthday. Got it, he repeated, actually typing it into his notes. And I need to set it every time we leave the house, even for short trips. Exactly. The neighbors keep an eye on the place for me, and they will call if they notice anything unusual. Marcus nodded, looking more responsible than I had seen him in years. I have got this, Boyd. I promise. This weekend is going to be perfect, and your place will be exactly as you left it. As I handed over the keys, I felt a mix of anxiety and hope. The anxiety was based on years of experience with Marcus's carelessness. But the hope was for something new, a shift in our dynamic that might finally reflect the mutual respect that had been missing. Do not make me regret this, I said, half joking but with an undertone of seriousness. You will not, he assured me, pocketing the keys. This is going to be the start of a whole new chapter. For me, and for us as brothers. I wanted to believe him. I really did. As we parted ways, I told myself that sometimes people need to be given the chance to prove themselves, to rise to expectations, rather than be limited by past failures. Maybe this was Marcus's moment to finally step up. That optimism would prove to be one of the most misplaced feelings of my entire life. The following Friday, I drove up to Lake Tahoe, planning to spend the weekend there, after Marcus and Rachel had departed. He had texted me a brief "thanks bro, all good on Monday" after their weekend stay, which I had taken as a positive sign that everything had gone as planned. I had even texted back asking if she had said yes to the proposal, but never received a response, which I chalked up to them being busy celebrating. The drive from San Francisco to Tahoe is normally one of my favorite parts of having the cabin, with the gradual transition from city to mountains, creating a perfect mental shift from work mode to relaxation. But as I turned onto the private road leading to my property, that anticipated sense of peace was immediately shattered. The first sign that something was wrong was the litter. Beer cans and red plastic cups were scattered across the driveway and front yard. Some crushed, others half-filled, and tipped over, staining the ground with dried alcohol. My heart rate quickened as I parked and stepped out of my car, the crunch of broken glass under my shoe making me wince. As I approached the house, a distinctive sour smell hit me, the unmistakable odor of stale beer, cigarette smoke, and something worse that I couldn't immediately identify. When I reached the front porch, I saw that one of the large picture windows facing the lake had a spider web crack spreading from its center, clearly from some kind of impact. My hands were shaking slightly as I unlocked the front door. I told myself that maybe it wasn't as bad as it seemed, that perhaps there had been a small gathering that got a little out of hand but nothing too serious. That fragile hope was obliterated the moment I stepped inside. The destruction was beyond anything I could have imagined. The open-concept living area looked like it had been hit by a tornado of malicious intent. The white sectional sofa I had carefully selected was now marred with dark stains, cigarette burns peppering the cushions and armrests. Someone had vomited on one end, and rather than cleaning it, they had simply flipped the cushion over, leaving the acidic smell to seep deep into the foam. The custom coffee table, a piece from a local artisan made from reclaimed wood that had cost me nearly $2,000, was not just damaged but destroyed. One of the legs had been completely broken off, and the surface was covered with burn marks from cigarettes, deep gouges, and rings from countless drinks left without coasters. Empty liquor bottles were scattered throughout the room, some broken, others stuffed with cigarette butts being used as makeshift ashtrays. The destruction extended to the walls, where someone had apparently thought it would be funny to throw drinks, leaving stains running down the custom paint job I had paid a premium for. My artwork hadn't been spared either. A painting by a Tahoe-based artist that had particularly spoken to me, a peaceful landscape of the lake at dawn, had been defaced with what looked like wine splashed across its surface. The kitchen was no better. Food had been left out to rot. Dishes were piled high in and around the sink, many of them broken. The expensive set of chef's knives I had invested in had been used to carve initials and crude images into the wooden countertop. The refrigerator door hung open, its contents either gone or spoiled, leaving yet another foul odor to permeate the space. As I moved through the house in a state of shocked disbelief, the damage inventory only grew. In the main bathroom, someone had apparently decided to flush items that should never go down a toilet, causing an overflow that had soaked into the floor tiles. The guest bedroom had been turned into some kind of improvised dance floor, with the mattress propped against the wall, stained with substances I didn't want to identify. The master bedroom, my personal retreat, had not been spared either. The duvet and sheets were missing, and the mattress had multiple stains and burns. My dresser drawers had been rifled through, personal items strewn about. A bottle of expensive cologne, a gift from a former girlfriend that I had kept for sentimental reasons, had been emptied all over the room, leaving an overpowering scent that mixed unpleasantly with the other odors in the house. Most disturbing of all, several items were missing altogether. A small collection of watches that I kept at the cabin was gone from the dresser. A limited edition vinyl record album, signed by the artist, had vanished from its display on the wall. Even the high-end Bluetooth speaker system I had installed throughout the house had been partially dismantled, with speakers missing from several rooms. As I stood in the middle of this chaos, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was from one of the neighbors, Nancy, a retired teacher who lived in the cabin year-round 3 houses down. Her message read, "Boyd, hope you found everything okay after that wild party. We were going to call the police Saturday night when things got really out of hand, but didn't want to cause trouble. Let us know if you need witness statements for insurance." Wild party? My brother had explicitly agreed to no parties, just him and Rachel, and perhaps 1 or 2 friends for the proposal. With growing suspicion, I opened Instagram and searched for my brother's username. There, documented for all to see, was the evidence of what had really happened at my cabin. Marcus had posted dozens of photos and videos from what he had hashtagged as #Tahoe Rager and #Best Weekend Ever. The images showed not 4 people as agreed, but what looked like 30 or more crowded into my cabin, drinking, smoking, dancing on furniture, and generally treating my property with complete disregard. In one particularly infuriating video, Marcus could be seen encouraging someone to do a flip onto my sofa, resulting in a loud crack as the frame gave way under the impact, followed by cheers from the crowd. There was not a single photo of a proposal, not one image of a quiet, romantic moment with Rachel. In fact, Rachel barely appeared in the photos at all, and when she did, she looked uncomfortable and out of place amid the chaos. The story about proposing had clearly been a complete fabrication, a ploy to get access to a free party venue. I scrolled through the comments, my anger growing with each one that praised Marcus for throwing such an epic party and thanking him for the insane weekend. Some even joked about the damage, with comments like "Rip that white couch" and "Your brother's gonna kill you when he sees what happened to that painting." With shaking hands, I called a local contractor I had worked with during the cabin renovation. He agreed to come over immediately to assess the damage. While waiting, I meticulously documented everything with photos and videos of my own, creating a detailed catalog of destruction that I knew would be necessary for both insurance and the confrontation that was sure to come. When Bill, the contractor, arrived, his normally jovial face turned grim as he walked through the property. "I have been doing this for 25 years, he said, shaking his head, "and I have never seen this level of deliberate damage in such a short period. This wasn't just a party that got out of hand, son. Some of this looks intentional." He pointed out areas where it seemed people had gone out of their way to cause damage, like the carved countertops and the deliberately broken furniture legs. Over the next hour, he made notes and rough estimates, occasionally letting out low whistles when discovering new damage. "The floors will need to be completely refinished," he said, pointing to deep scratches and burns in the hardwood. "Several sections of drywall need to be replaced due to the moisture damage. The bathroom will need significant plumbing work and new flooring." And that's just the structural stuff. By the time he finished his assessment, the preliminary estimate for repairs alone came to just over $18,000, not including replacement of furniture, electronics, and personal items. When I added those costs, plus the professional cleaning service that would be required to make the place habitable again, the total damage exceeded $25,000. My insurance agent, when I called him later that day, delivered another blow. "Your policy has a clause about damage caused by guests invited by the homeowner," he explained. "Since you gave your brother permission to use the property, some of this may not be covered, particularly the theft of personal items. We will need to investigate further." As the full reality of the situation sank in, my shock gave way to a cold, clear anger, unlike anything I had felt before. This wasn't just about the money, substantial as that amount was. It was about the complete betrayal of trust, the callous disregard for something important to me, and the stark reminder that my brother had not changed at all. If anything, he had gotten worse, more calculating in his irresponsibility. I tried calling Marcus repeatedly, but he didn't answer. I left increasingly direct voicemails, the last one simply stating, "I have seen the Instagram posts. Call me back immediately." When he still didn't respond, I sent a text with the same message. Finally, as the sun was setting over the lake that should have been providing me with a peaceful evening view, but instead highlighted the destruction all around me, my phone rang with Marcus's name on the screen. It was time for a long overdue conversation. "Yo, what's up?" Marcus answered as if nothing was wrong, his tone casual and unconcerned. "What's up?" I repeated, struggling to keep my voice level. "I am standing in my cabin right now, looking at thousands of dollars in damage. That's what's up." There was a brief pause before Marcus responded with a laugh that made my blood boil. "Oh yeah, about that. Things got a little crazy, I guess. Some of Rachel's friends showed up, and then some of their friends. You know how it goes." "No, Marcus. I don't know how it goes," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "What I know is that you lied to me about why you wanted to use the cabin. There was never any proposal, was there?" "Well, not exactly," he admitted without a hint of remorse. "But Rachel and I did have a good talk about our future. That counts for something, right? What counts is that you trashed my property after explicitly agreeing not to have parties. Do you have any idea how much damage you've caused?" "Come on, it can't be that bad," he scoffed. "Nothing important got damaged, right? Just some furniture and stuff. That can all be replaced." His dismissive attitude pushed me further toward the edge. "Just some furniture? Marcus, there are cigarette burns in my hardwood floors. The plumbing is damaged. My artwork is ruined. Items have been stolen. This is well over $25,000 in damage and theft." Seriously? For the first time, He sounded slightly concerned, though not for the right reasons. That seems exaggerated. I am sure most of it can just be cleaned up. Look, I will come by next weekend and help you straighten things out. Straighten things out? I was nearly shouting now. This isn't something you can fix with a vacuum and some cleaning spray. This requires professional contractors and thousands of dollars. All right, chill out, Marcus said, his tone shifting to the one he typically used when trying to diffuse situations he'd created. I am sorry things got out of hand, but you know I don't have that kind of money. Then you shouldn't have destroyed property worth that kind of money, I countered. This isn't going away, Marcus. You're responsible for this, and I expect you to make it right. What do you want me to say? I can't magically produce $25,000. Figure it out, I snapped. Sell your car. Get a second job. Take out a loan. I don't care how you do it, but you are going to fix this. There was silence on the other end for a moment before Marcus spoke again, his voice taking on a familiar wheedling quality. Maybe Mom and Dad could help out? You know they always say family should help family. Before I could respond, I heard my phone beep with another call. Looking at the screen, I saw it was my mother. Speaking of Mom and Dad, I have to take another call. This conversation isn't over. I switched calls without waiting for his response. Boyd, honey, my mother's voice came through, sounding worried. Marcus just called us. He says you are extremely angry about some minor damage at the cabin. What's going on? Of course he had immediately called them. Of course he had downplayed the damage. The predictability of it all only fueled my anger. Minor damage? Mom, have you seen the photos on his Instagram? Did he tell you about the party he threw with 30 people after promising me he was only using the cabin for a romantic weekend to propose? Well, no, she admitted. He said there were a few more people than expected, but that everything was basically fine, except for some spills and maybe a broken glass or two. I laughed bitterly. Let me send you some photos. I quickly selected a dozen of the most egregious examples of destruction and texted them to her. Take a look at these, and then tell me if you still think I am overreacting. There was silence, as she presumably looked at the images, then a soft, oh my. After another pause, she continued. Well, I can see why you're upset. But you know your brother doesn't have the means to pay for repairs like this. He's still finding his way career-wise. He's 27 years old, Mom. When does finding his way end and taking responsibility begin? Everyone matures at their own pace, Boyd. You've always been the responsible one. And let's be honest, you're doing very well financially. This is unfortunate, but it's not going to bankrupt you. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So, because I worked hard and built a successful career, I should just absorb the cost of Marcus's destructive behavior? How is that fair? Life isn't always fair, honey, she said with the patronizing tone that had infuriated me since childhood. Family helps family. You remember how your father and I always taught you to look out for your brother. I looked out for him by trusting him with my property, and look how that turned out. He didn't mean any harm, she insisted, falling back on her standard defense. He just gets carried away sometimes. He's more spontaneous than you, more social. Spontaneous? Social? Mom, he deliberately lied to me to get access to my cabin, threw a massive party after promising not to, and then documented the destruction on social media like it was something to be proud of. That's not spontaneity, that's calculated deceit. My mother sighed heavily. You're being too harsh. Why don't we all get together for dinner this weekend and talk about this calmly? Your father wants to speak with you too. Though I knew it would likely only lead to more frustration, I agreed to dinner at my parents' house that Sunday. The next 2 days were consumed with getting the cabin secured, filing insurance claims, and arranging for emergency repairs to prevent further damage from the plumbing issues and broken window. By the time Sunday evening arrived, my initial shock had crystallized into a cold determination. When I arrived at my parents' suburban home, I found that Marcus was already there, sitting at the dining table looking surprisingly unconcerned. My father, a retired manufacturing manager, with traditional views on family hierarchy, greeted me with his usual firm handshake. "Boyd, good to see you," he said, as if this were just another family dinner. "Your mother's made pot roast, your favorite." "I'm not here for pot roast," I replied, taking a seat across from Marcus, who avoided meeting my eyes. "I'm here to discuss how Marcus is going to take responsibility for destroying my property." My mother bustled in from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "Let's all just have a nice dinner first, and then we can talk about all that unpleasantness afterward." "I'd rather address it now," I insisted. My father frowned, taking his seat at the head of the table. "Your mother went to a lot of trouble to prepare this meal. The least you could do is enjoy it before getting into all that." Recognizing that this was a battle not worth fighting, I relented, and we proceeded with what had to be the most tension-filled family dinner in recent memory. My mother filled the awkward silence with inconsequential chatter about neighborhood gossip and distant relatives, while my father occasionally grunted in agreement. Marcus seemed to relax as the meal progressed, perhaps thinking that my anger had subsided or that our parents had successfully diffused the situation. When my mother finally cleared the dessert plates, my father leaned back in his chair and addressed the elephant in the room. "All right. So there was some damage to your cabin. These things happen, especially when young people get together." "These things happen?" I echoed in disbelief. "Dad, this wasn't an accident or a small mishap. This was willful destruction of property that I worked extremely hard to acquire." "Nobody's saying it wasn't unfortunate," my mother interjected. "But Marcus has already apologized, haven't you, dear?" Marcus nodded, putting on his best contrite expression. "Yeah, I really am sorry, Boyd. Things just got out of hand." "Sorry doesn't fix my cabin or replace my stolen belongings," I responded. "I need actual compensation for the damages, which currently stand at over $25,000. My father whistled. "That's an awful lot of money. Are you sure you're not exaggerating the costs? I have detailed quotes from contractors and itemized lists of everything that needs to be repaired or replaced. I'm happy to show them to you." Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Look, you know I can't afford to pay that. I barely make enough to cover my own rent." "That's not my problem," I stated firmly. "You caused the damage. You need to take responsibility for it." "Boyd," my mother said, her tone disappointed. "He's your brother. You're so blessed financially. Would it really hurt you to just take care of this and move on? For the sake of family harmony?" And there it was, the familiar refrain that had defined our family dynamic for as long as I could remember. My success was being used against me, turned into an obligation to clean up after Marcus's messes. So because I've worked hard and been responsible with my money, I should just absorb the cost of Marcus's irresponsibility? I asked, looking from my mother to my father. "How does that teach him anything?" "He's learned his lesson," my father insisted. "Haven't you, son?" Marcus nodded vigorously. "Absolutely. I'll never do anything like this again." "Until the next time," I countered. "When there's something else expensive of mine that you can borrow and destroy." "And then what? I just keep paying for your mistakes indefinitely?" "You're being dramatic," my mother sighed. "This was one incident. One incident that's part of a lifelong pattern," I pointed out. "Marcus has never had to face real consequences for his actions, because someone else always cleans up after him." Usually you too. Sometimes, me. My father's face reddened. We raised both of you the same way. It's not our fault you turned out different. Marcus just needs more time to find his path. You absolutely did not raise us the same way, I challenged, decades of pent-up frustration finally breaking through. I had rules and expectations. Marcus had excuses and bailouts. That's not fair, my mother protested. No. What's not fair is expecting me to subsidize the consequences of Marcus's choices, because you've never held him accountable for anything. Marcus, sensing the conversation turning against him, tried to redirect. Maybe we could work out some kind of payment plan? I could pay you a little each month. How much are you thinking? I asked, momentarily hopeful that he might be taking this seriously. I don't know, maybe like $100 a month? A quick mental calculation showed how absurd that offer was. At that rate, it would take you over 20 years to pay for the damage. He shrugged. It's all I can afford right now. My father jumped in. That seems reasonable to me. He's making an effort. It's not reasonable, I countered. It's another way to avoid real responsibility. The argument continued to escalate, with my parents defending Marcus at every turn. They suggested that I was being materialistic for caring about just things. They implied that my insistence on payment showed a lack of family loyalty. They even brought up childhood incidents where they claimed Marcus had always looked up to me and how I was setting a poor example by being so rigid. As the conversation went in circles, I felt a strange calm settle over me. This was never going to change. My parents would always enable Marcus, and he would always take advantage of their protection. But that didn't mean I had to participate in this dysfunctional system any longer. I think we're done here, I said, standing up from the table. You've made your position clear, and I've made mine. So that's it? My father demanded. You're just going to hold this grudge against your brother? This isn't about a grudge, I explained. It's about boundaries and consequences, something this family seems allergic to. What are you going to do? My mother asked, looking worried. You're not going to cut off contact with the family, are you? I'm going to handle this my way, I replied, moving toward the door. Since it's clear I won't get any support from any of you. What does that mean? Marcus called after me, finally showing some concern. It means I'm done enabling this behavior, I answered without turning around. You'll see soon enough what it means practically. As I walked out to my car, I could hear my mother's voice calling after me, and my father's angry declarations that I was overreacting. But for the first time in years, their opinions didn't matter to me. I had reached a breaking point, and on the other side of that break was a clarity I hadn't experienced before. I drove home with a plan already forming in my mind. If my family wouldn't acknowledge the seriousness of what had happened, I would have to show them in terms they couldn't ignore or dismiss. It was time for a different approach, one that would finally establish the boundaries that words alone had failed to create. The morning after the disastrous family dinner, I took a personal day from work and scheduled appointments with 3 professionals: my lawyer, my accountant, and a contractor who specialized in high-end renovations. My approach was no longer emotional. I had entered a state of methodical determination. My first meeting was with Richard, my attorney, a pragmatic man in his 50s who had helped me with the purchase of both my primary residence and the vacation property. I laid out the situation in detail, showing him the photos and videos of the damage, along with the Instagram evidence of the party. Legally, you have a very strong case, Richard confirmed after reviewing everything. Your brother had limited permission to use the property under specific conditions, which he clearly violated. The damage goes well beyond normal wear and tear, and there's documented evidence of the connection between his actions and the destruction. What are my options? I asked. Several, depending on how far you want to take this, he explained. We could start with a formal demand letter for compensation. If that doesn't yield results, small claims court would be an option for damages up to the statutory limit. For the full amount, we'd need to file in civil court. And what about my parents? They're essentially acting as his enablers in this. Richard thought for a moment. That's trickier. They don't have direct liability for the damage. But if they've made any statements acknowledging the damage and dismissing it, or suggesting that you should absorb the cost, that could potentially be relevant to show a pattern of enabling behavior. By the end of our hour-long consultation, Richard had outlined a comprehensive legal strategy that started with formal documentation and escalated through increasingly serious legal steps if necessary. He also drafted a preliminary demand letter that laid out in clear, firm language the extent of the damages, the expected compensation, and the consequences of non-payment. My next stop was with Teresa, my accountant, who helped me understand the financial implications of the damage, including tax considerations for insurance payouts versus personal compensation, and the potential impact on the property's value. Document everything meticulously, she advised. Every repair, every replacement, every hour spent dealing with this mess. It all has financial implications, and if this does end up in court, that documentation will be crucial. She also recommended setting up a separate account specifically for tracking expenses related to the damage, which would make it easier to maintain clear records and potentially help with any legal proceedings. My final consultation that day was with Mark, a contractor who specialized in luxury properties. Unlike Bill, the local Tahoe contractor, who had given me the initial assessment, Mark had experience with legal cases involving property damage and could provide the kind of detailed, court-ready documentation that might be necessary. What we need here is not just an estimate, but a forensic analysis of the damage, Mark explained as he reviewed the photos. We'll break everything down line by line, with market rate costs and detailed explanations of why each repair is necessary. This isn't just about fixing things. It's about creating an unassailable record of the damage and its cost. With all 3 consultations complete, I returned home and spent the rest of the day developing what I called my comprehensive accountability plan. This wasn't just about getting the money for repairs. It was about fundamentally changing the dynamic in my family and establishing boundaries that would be respected. The plan had several components. First, I would create a formal invoice that itemized every single item damaged or stolen, along with repair costs, replacement values, contractor labor rates, and even a line item for my own time spent dealing with the aftermath. This wasn't just about the raw numbers. It was about making the full impact of Marcus's actions impossible to dismiss or minimize. The invoice would be professionally designed and printed, with official letterhead and payment terms clearly stated. It would look exactly like any other serious business invoice, because that's exactly what it was. This wasn't a family favor or a brotherly disagreement. It was a legitimate financial obligation resulting from destructive actions. Second, I would draft a new family gathering policy document that laid out clear rules for any future family use of any property I owned. This would include mandatory security deposits, signed agreements acknowledging liability for any damage, and explicit statements that failure to adhere to these policies would result in immediate loss of access privileges. The policy wouldn't just apply to Marcus. It would apply equally to my parents or any other family members who might want to use my properties. No exceptions, no special treatment, no more taking advantage of my success while dismissing my boundaries. Third, I would prepare a formal letter explaining my position, the steps I had taken, and the non-negotiable expectations I had going forward. This wasn't an angry rant or an emotional appeal. It was a clear, businesslike communication that left no room for misinterpretation or manipulation. As I worked on these documents late into the night, I felt a strange mix of emotions. There was sadness at the realization that my relationship with my family might never be the same after this. There was anger still simmering below the surface at the injustice of the situation, but predominantly, there was a growing sense of empowerment and clarity. For too long, I had allowed myself to be manipulated by family expectations that always seemed to flow in one direction. I was expected to forgive, to understand, to accommodate, to provide, while Marcus was expected to do virtually nothing except occasionally express insincere remorse. That imbalance had created a dynamic that wasn't just unfair to me. It was ultimately harmful to Marcus himself, as it prevented him from developing the responsibility and accountability that are essential parts of adult life. By the time I went to bed that night, I had completed drafts of all 3 documents. The invoice came to a total of $27,342.18, which included not just the physical repairs and replacements but also compensation for my time, travel expenses for the additional trips to Tahoe I'd need to make to oversee repairs, and even a modest amount for the emotional distress caused by the betrayal of trust. The new family gathering policy was 3 pages long and read like a rental agreement, with sections on security deposits, liability, property rules, and consequences for violations. It was thorough, unambiguous, and, most importantly, applied equally to everyone, with no special exceptions or considerations. The accompanying letter explained in measured but firm language why I had taken this approach, referencing the years of imbalanced expectations and the repeated dismissal of my boundaries. It made clear that this was not negotiable, and that any attempts to dismiss or minimize the situation would only result in escalation to legal remedies. The next morning, I sent all 3 documents to a professional printer, choosing high-quality paper and professional binding for the policy document. When they were ready, I picked them up and placed them in a crisp manila envelope. The time for family dinner discussions and circular arguments was over. This would be a formal presentation, with no room for the usual tactics of deflection, minimization, or emotional manipulation. As I prepared to deliver these documents in person, I felt a calm resolve replace the turmoil of the past days. This wasn't just about money or property anymore. It was about finally standing up for myself and demanding the respect and consideration that I had earned but had too long been denied. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing for certain. The old dynamic was broken, and it would never be restored. Either a new, healthier relationship would emerge from these ashes, or I would need to accept that some family ties, despite biology and history, are not worth the damage they cause. With that thought firmly in mind, I headed to my parents' house, manila envelope in hand, ready to deliver consequences that had been years in the making. I arrived at my parents' suburban home unannounced on a Wednesday evening, knowing they would both be home after their workday. As I expected, Marcus's car was in the driveway as well. He had been spending more time at our parents' house lately, claiming it was to help them out, though I suspected it had more to do with his latest financial shortfall. I rang the doorbell, manila envelope tucked under my arm, and waited with an odd sense of calm. My mother answered, her surprise at seeing me quickly, giving way to cautious hope. Boyd, I didn't know you were coming over. Are you here to talk things through? The relief in her voice suggested she thought I had come to apologize, or at least compromise. I am here to talk. Yes, I replied neutrally. Is Dad home too? And Marcus? They're both in the living room watching the game. Come in, I'll make some coffee. I followed her into the house where I had grown up, noting how little had changed over the years. The same furniture, the same photos on the walls, the same dynamic that I was about to challenge fundamentally. My father looked up from the television as I entered the living room, his expression guarded. "Boyd. Didn't expect to see you so soon after Sunday." Marcus, sprawled on the couch with his phone in hand, barely acknowledged my arrival with a nod. His casual posture suggested he thought the storm had passed, that my appearance meant I had come to accept the status quo, as I always had before. "I need to talk to all of you," I said. "Together." Something in my tone must have registered because my father reached for the remote and muted the TV. "All right, what's this about?" My mother returned from the kitchen. "The coffee will be ready soon. Why don't we all sit at the dining table like civilized people?" We moved to the dining room, the site of countless family meals, and, more recently, the failed discussion about Marcus's responsibility. This time, however, the outcome would be different. Once we were all seated, I placed the manila envelope on the table and looked at each of them in turn. "I've given a lot of thought to our conversation on Sunday, and I've come to some conclusions about how we move forward from here." My mother reached across the table to pat my hand. "I knew you'd come around. Family has to stick together." After all, I gently withdrew my hand and opened the envelope. "That's actually not why I'm here." I removed the invoice first, placing it in the center of the table. "This is a formal invoice for all damages, theft, and associated costs resulting from the destruction of my property." The professional quality of the document seemed to catch them all by surprise. This wasn't a hastily scribbled list or a family squabble. This was a business matter, presented with all the seriousness it deserved. "The total comes to $27,342.18, I continued, my voice steady. "This includes structural repairs, furniture replacement, cleaning services, compensation for stolen items, and my time and travel expenses related to dealing with this situation." Marcus scoffed, though I noticed a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "You can't be serious with this." "I've never been more serious," I replied, looking directly at him. "Every item on that invoice represents real damage that you caused, and that someone has to pay for. That someone is you." My father picked up the invoice, his face darkening as he scanned it. $27,000? This is outrageous. It's actually a conservative estimate, I countered. I didn't include potential lost rental income while the property is being repaired, or the full replacement value of the sentimental items that were stolen or destroyed. "Boyd," my mother interjected, her voice taking on the placating tone. I knew so well. "I understand you're upset, but this is excessive. We're family." "Yes, we are family," I agreed, which is why I expected basic respect for my property and honesty about the intentions for using it, neither of which I received. I removed the next document from the envelope. "This is the new family gathering policy. It outlines the conditions under which any family member, including all three of you, may use any property I own in the future." My father's face was turning an alarming shade of red as he flipped through the document. "Security deposits? Liability waivers? What is this? A hotel?" "It's a necessary protection, given recent events," I explained calmly. "If family members want to use my properties, they will need to abide by these terms. No exceptions." Marcus, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally exploded. "This is insane. You're treating us like strangers." "No," I corrected him. "I'm treating you like adults who are responsible for their actions. Something that should have happened a long time ago." I then removed the final document, the letter explaining my position. "This outlines why I've taken these steps and what happens next. I encourage all of you to read it carefully. My mother, who had begun to skim the letter, looked up with tears forming in her eyes. You're threatening to take legal action against your own brother? Your own family? I'm stating the consequences if the invoice isn't paid. I clarified. And yes, those consequences include small claims court, civil action, and reporting the theft to the police as necessary. My father slammed his hand on the table. This is not how we raised you to treat family, Boyd. Actually, Dad, you raised me to be responsible for my actions, to work hard for what I want, to respect other people's property. I'm simply asking that the same standards be applied to Marcus. Marcus, now looking genuinely alarmed, turned to our parents. You're not going to let him do this, right? You'll help me? Before they could answer, I interjected. That's entirely up to them, but they should know that if they choose to pay this invoice on your behalf, they're continuing the same pattern that led to this situation in the first place. They're telling you that your actions don't have consequences, that someone will always clean up your messes. My mother's tears were flowing freely now. How can you be so cold? He's your brother. This isn't about emotion, Mom. It's about accountability. Something this family has never required of Marcus. My father stood up, towering over the table. I won't be threatened or manipulated in my own home. We don't do this to family. That's where you're wrong, Dad, I replied, remaining seated and calm. This family has been manipulating me for years. Every time Marcus messed up, and I was expected to understand. Every time he was held to a different standard than me. Every time his needs and feelings were prioritized over mine. That was manipulation. The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. My father remained standing, his hands braced on the table, while my mother dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. Marcus looked between them, clearly waiting for them to solve this problem as they had solved all his others. The payment is due in 30 days, I continued when no one spoke. If it's not received in full by that date, I will proceed with legal action as outlined in the letter. I've already consulted with an attorney who confirms that I have a strong case, especially with the social media evidence Marcus so helpfully provided. You would sue your own brother over money? My father demanded, his voice incredulous. No, I corrected him. I would hold my brother accountable for deliberately destroying my property after lying about his intentions. The money is just how that accountability is measured in this situation. I stood up, gathering the envelope. I've left copies of everything for you to review more thoroughly. The payment instructions are included in the invoice. As I turned to leave, my mother's voice stopped me. Boyd, please. If you do this, it could damage our family permanently. I turned back to face them one last time. The damage was done when Marcus destroyed my property, and none of you took it seriously. This isn't me causing damage. This is me responding to it. There's a difference. You'll regret this, my father warned. When you need your family, and we're not there because of this stunt. That's the thing, Dad, I replied, my hand on the doorknob. When I've needed my family really needed them, they haven't been there anyway. At least not in the ways that matter. With that, I left, closing the door behind me on their shocked faces and protests. As I walked to my car, I felt a strange mixture of emotions, sadness for what this might mean for our family relationships, but also a profound sense of relief. For perhaps the first time in my adult life, I had stood up for myself completely, without compromise or apology. Whatever happened next, whether they paid the invoice, contested it, or cut me off completely, I knew I had done what was necessary. I had finally broken the cycle of enabling and excuse-making that had defined our family dynamic for too long. As I drove away from my childhood home, I realized that this confrontation, difficult as it was, represented something important. The beginning of a new chapter in which I would no longer accept treatment that diminished me or my boundaries. Whether my family chose to be part of that new chapter remained to be seen. The first week after delivering my ultimatum passed in complete silence. No calls, no texts, no emails from any family member. I hadn't expected immediate compliance, but the total communication blackout suggested they were either in shock or coordinating their response. Either way, I went about my life, focusing on work and arranging for the most urgent repairs at the cabin to begin. 10 days after our confrontation, my phone lit up with my mother's name. I answered with a neutral, "Hello, Mom." "Boyd," she began, her voice strained. "We need to talk about the situation." "I'm listening," I replied simply. "Your father and I have discussed things, and while we still think you're being extreme, we're willing to help with some of the costs." This was unexpected. I had anticipated more resistance, more attempts to guilt me into backing down. "Help how?" "Exactly?" She sighed deeply. "We can pay for the structural repairs, the floors, the plumbing, the window. But we think Marcus should be responsible for the furniture and personal items." "That's a start," I acknowledged. "And what does Marcus say about this arrangement?" "He's coming to terms with it. We've told him he needs to step up and take responsibility. Your father has offered to loan him the money for his portion, but with a formal repayment plan and interest." I couldn't help but feel surprised. This was the first time I'd ever heard of my parents imposing actual consequences on Marcus. "And he's agreed to this?" "Not happily," my mother admitted. "But he knows he doesn't have a choice. Your father made it clear that if he doesn't agree, he's on his own to deal with your legal action." The conversation continued, with practical details about payment timing and methods. By the end, we had reached an agreement. My parents would transfer funds for the structural repairs within the week, and Marcus would sign a formal agreement to pay his portion in monthly installments, secured by a lien on his car. What struck me most about the conversation wasn't the financial resolution, though that was significant. It was the subtle shift in my mother's tone. There was a new note of respect there, perhaps even a reluctant admission that my approach, while uncomfortable, had forced a necessary reckoning. Over the next few weeks, a fascinating transformation began to unfold within my family. My parents, true to their word, transferred the money for the structural repairs. More surprisingly, they began holding Marcus to the repayment schedule they had established, refusing to accept his usual excuses when the first payment date approached and he claimed to be short on funds. "You'll need to pick up extra shifts then," my father told him during a phone call I overheard when visiting their home for a brief, somewhat awkward dinner. "The payment is due on the 15th, no exceptions." Marcus, for his part, showed signs of actually growing up a bit. He secured a more stable job at a marketing firm, stopped posting constantly about parties on social media, and even reached out to me directly with a text that, while not a profound apology, acknowledged that he had messed up big time and was working on doing better. 3 months after the confrontation, the cabin was fully restored to its previous condition, with some improvements I had decided to add during the renovation. I had installed an advanced security system with cameras and remote monitoring, upgraded the locks to smart locks with individualized access codes, and implemented other measures to ensure that nothing like this could happen again. When the work was complete, I invited my parents up to see the restored property, an olive branch of sorts. They accepted cautiously, and the visit, while not entirely comfortable, represented a step toward a new kind of relationship. As we stood on the deck overlooking the lake, my father cleared his throat awkwardly. "You've done a nice job with the repairs," he admitted. "Place looks even better than before." Thanks, I replied. It took a lot of coordination with the contractors, but I'm happy with how it turned out. After a moment of silence, he added something that caught me completely by surprise. I owe you an apology, Boyd. I turned to look at him, unsure I had heard correctly. My father was not a man who apologized easily or often. Your mother and we didn't always. He paused, searching for words. We didn't always treat you and your brother the same. We expected more from you, because you seemed able to handle it. That wasn't fair. No, it wasn't, I agreed softly. Seeing how Marcus handled himself, the mess he made here, and his attitude afterward, it made us realize we haven't done him any favors over the years. Or you. My mother joined us on the deck, slipping her arm through my father's. What your father is trying to say is that we're proud of you. Not just for your success, but for standing your ground. It couldn't have been easy to take the stand you did. It wasn't, I acknowledged. I was afraid it might mean losing my family. We wouldn't have let that happen, she assured me. Though I can't say we weren't shocked by your approach. Sometimes shock is the only thing that breaks through established patterns, I said. The conversation wasn't a complete resolution of decades of family dynamics, but it was an acknowledgement, a beginning. And for now, that was enough. The most surprising change came from Marcus himself. 6 months after the incident, he invited me to coffee. Just the two of us. He arrived on time, looking more put together than I had seen him in years, with a portfolio under his arm. I want to show you something, he said, after we had exchanged somewhat awkward greetings. He opened the portfolio to reveal a business plan for a small graphic design company he wanted to start. I've been taking online courses in design. Turns out I'm pretty good at it. The plan was impressively thorough, with realistic projections and a modest initial investment requirement. I'm not asking you for money, he clarified quickly. Seeing my expression, I'm applying for a small business loan. I just wanted your feedback, since you know more about business plans than anyone else I know. We spent the next hour going through his proposal, with me offering suggestions and him taking notes. It was possibly the most adult interaction we had ever had. As we were wrapping up, he looked at me seriously. I'm still paying for what happened at the cabin, both literally and figuratively. But in a weird way, it might have been the best thing that could have happened to me. How do you figure that? I asked. It was the first time nobody bailed me out. Well, not completely anyway. Mom and Dad helped, but with strings attached. Real consequences. It made me realize I've been coasting on their enabling and your tolerance for years. That's not a real life. I studied my younger brother's face, seeing a maturity there that had been absent before. That's quite an insight. Don't get me wrong, I was furious with you at first. But after a while, I started to see that you did what no one else in my life had ever done. You held me accountable. That's actually a form of respect, in a way. Our relationship wasn't magically healed in that moment, but like with my parents, it was a beginning. A foundation for something potentially healthier than what we had before. As the 1-year anniversary of the cabin incident approached, I found myself reflecting on everything that had transpired and the lessons I had learned. The most important one was the value of boundaries. For years, I had allowed my boundaries to be crossed in the name of family peace, not realizing that in doing so, I was enabling behaviors that were ultimately harmful to everyone involved, including those doing the boundary crossing. I had also learned about the courage it takes to stand firm when every familiar pattern and pressure is pushing you to back down. It would have been easier in the short term to absorb the cost of the damage to maintain the status quo, but the long-term cost of that choice would have been far greater, a continued erosion of my self-respect and the perpetuation of a dynamic that was holding my brother back from real growth. Perhaps most importantly, I had discovered that sometimes the most caring thing you can do for someone is to let them face the consequences of their actions. My parents thought they were showing love to Marcus by shielding him from consequences, but in reality, they were preventing him from developing the resilience and responsibility that come from facing one's mistakes head-on. The cabin now stands fully restored, perhaps even more beautiful than before. But more significant than the physical restoration has been the gradual rebuilding of my family relationships on a foundation of mutual respect, rather than enabling and resentment. It is still a work in progress, with occasional setbacks and old patterns that try to reassert themselves. But the trajectory is positive, moving toward healthier interactions and more authentic connections. I have come to understand that true family is not defined by unconditional tolerance of harmful behavior. It's defined by caring enough to hold each other to standards that promote growth and well-being, even when that's uncomfortable. Sometimes, the most profound act of love is setting a boundary and holding firm to it, allowing the other person the dignity of facing their own challenges and finding their own solutions. As I sit on the deck of my cabin now, watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and crimson, I feel a sense of peace that goes beyond the beauty of my surroundings. It's the peace that comes from knowing that sometimes the hardest conversations and the firmest boundaries can lead to the most meaningful growth and healing. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you have ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members, I'd love to hear about your experience in the comments below. Did you stand your ground, or did you find another way forward? Remember to like and subscribe if this story resonated with you, and share it with someone who might be struggling with similar family dynamics. Sometimes, knowing we're not alone in these challenges is the first step toward finding the courage to address them. Wishing you strength and clarity in all your relationships.